it's co-written by Brian May from Queen. Who knew? Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel for Lady Couture and welcome to my whimsical little corner of the internet. Today I am in my sewing room for once and not out adventuring. Now I'm not actually doing any sewing today, unfortunately. I'm sorry to disappoint you. There will be sewing videos coming, I do promise. They take quite a lot of planning and prep, so yes, I don't get as many of those done as I would like. However, I am in my sewing room today, which is a start, but I thought it might be fun to have a little rummage in my costuming book library. People always like book recommendations, so I thought, as we are heading up to the holiday season, the gift giving season, and possibly afterwards if you are planning your projects for next year, or you might want some ideas to spend any Christmas money that you might get, I thought, well, perhaps I would recommend some of the books that I use regularly in my sewing room to inspire you for your projects, future projects, things like that. This is going to be an affiliated video, my first affiliated video, and so for most of the books that I'm going to feature in this video, there will be a link in the description box down below. And that will take you to Amazon, and if you so wish to purchase those books via that link, it means I will earn a little bit of commission for recommending them to you. By all means, if you would rather go support an independent bookseller and you can find the books elsewhere, that's absolutely no problem. I just hope that this video is inspiring for you and fun to watch along with as well. Some of the books I'm going to feature are going to be just general dressmaking books, which I think is just a good staple for any dressmaker, no matter your skill level, to have in your sewing room, in your workroom. It's always good to be able to refer back to them should you so wish. There are going to be some general historical costuming books in here, and there are going to be some that are going to be very relevant to specific eras. If you've followed my channel for a while, you will know that I tend to focus on Regency through to early 20th century. So those are the books that I have mostly in my workroom, but I do also have one or two others which I'm going to be recommending as well. And then I'll probably throw in a few honourable mentions as well for you. Apologies if the sound has just changed. I forgot I wasn't wearing my microphone. Now I have my microphone connected, let's carry on. So the first book I'm going to recommend is, bear with me, I've got to find them because I didn't organise this and actually pull out the books that I wanted to firsthand. I will going to be diving in and pulling out the books as I remember them. So yes, bear with me. So this is the first book I'm going to recommend, and this is one of the oldest books that I have had in my collection. So we're probably going back over 20 years now. But this is Winifred Aldrich's Metric Pattern Cutting. This was pretty much our pattern drafting Bible when I was doing fashion studies and kind of learning my craft at university. This has been published multiple times and in multiple editions over the years. So this is the third edition. I can't remember what edition they're on now, but it has been updated and reproduced since I had this particular version, but more or less the basic information that's inside is the same. So this is ideal for you if you are interested in drafting your own patterns. It literally takes you through, so it takes you through from taking your basic body measurements and then how you actually draw those out and draft them into your basic pattern blocks. That's going to have to stay up there. And then it goes through various different garment types and how to draft them. It also has sections on basic problems with pattern drafting and kind of initial alterations that you might need to make to suit different body types, different shapes and things like that. So yeah, so this is a really useful basic tool book to have in your workroom, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. There is also a menswear version, and I believe there is a children's wear version as well. So if your dressmaking journey is at the point where you are beyond using ready-made commercial patterns and you want to start designing and sort of drafting for yourself, your own designs, yes, these books should be on your list, #1 priority to buy. Start making a pile of my books as I go through them. Next is another kind of basic sewing room staple that I recommend that everybody should have some form of in their workroom, and that is a basic sewing technique kind of help book, guidebook. This particular one is the Dressmaker's Technique Bible, a complete guide to fashion sewing techniques by Lorna Knight. It's not necessarily the best that's out there, but I've found it very useful. It takes you through from very basic, early, first kind of lessons in sewing, like putting darts and things like that in, through to more complicated techniques like collars, like tailoring, piping, hems, embellishment techniques like get the smocking and things like that. And I find it's really handy just to have something like this around, no matter what stage you are at, how much sewing you do, how accomplished you are. Sometimes you do just come across a technique that you've never done before, or a technique that you don't do as often as others, and sometimes it is just handy just to have a little reference book that you can dip into just to double check on things, refresh yourself on a technique, also, or if you're learning a technique that you have never done before. I quite like that this one actually has a spiral bind in it, even though it's fully covered up by the spine on the outside, but it means that when it's open it does lay nice and flat. There's nothing worse than a hardback book that you're open and you're trying to kind of reference from, and it won't stay open. So yes, I do like that feature of this book. All right, now for probably what is the most exciting book in my collection, and the first of the actual costume history books that I'm going to introduce you to. This whopper, don't be put off by what looks like a very modern kind of avant-garde kind of fashion garment on the front here. This monster of a book is Fashion, a history from the 18th to the 20th century, and it is essentially the collection of the Kyoto Costume Institute in Japan. And oh my word, the costumes that they have in their collection are, they are everything. They have absolutely beautiful examples of costume, and this book basically shows you that. So yeah, it does start, I think it starts back, just dabbles into the 17th century at the beginning with some very early textile examples, but there's a huge chunk of the book which goes through the 18th century and all the various changes in there, through to the Regency, and then of course right the way through the 19th century and on into the 20th century. and it does go right up to the 1980s, 1990s, I believe. It features close-up detailed shots of fabrics, accessories and trimmings, but it also has the gowns and costumes themselves beautifully mounted on appropriately shaped mannequins, because there's nothing worse than you go to a museum and it's just the bustle gown is just plonked on a modern mannequin without the correct undergarments underneath, and it just looks really sad and droopy. These gowns in this book are displayed properly, so you can really see the shape that the gowns create throughout the different decades, which is one of the reasons why I love this book so much, is because you can literally follow through the changing trends of fashion history. And one of the things I'm always say is that, you don't get to 1800 and suddenly we're in the Regency era. You see that transition is much more nuanced, and the certain styles and things just start to kind of come in a little bit earlier, and then they develop into kind of the full-blown iconic look of that era, if you will. So this book is really great for that. This is quite an old version now. Again, I've had this about 20 years, if not more. I don't know if they still produce this exact edition, but I do know there are other editions which has a more pink colour to it. But yes, you will find it linked, whichever version I can find that's available on Amazon will be linked down below for you. The next book I'm going to recommend is in a similar vein to the Kyoto Costume Institute book, but these are the books produced by the V&A, the Victorian Albert Museum in London. But they basically broke down their books on costume history into the centuries. So this particular one is 19th century fashion in detail. There's also one for 18th century, I think there's a 20th century one, I can't remember, but I don't have those particular ones. I have the 19th century one, and much like the Kyoto Costume Institute one, this gives a really in-depth look at the costumes in their collection with some absolutely stunning photographs, both men's and women's fashions, which is also featured in the Kyoto book. Although, as always, women's fashion usually takes the precedence. But yeah, as the name suggests, I should put out the author of this is Lucy Johnston as well, but it's published for the V&A. Yeah, so as the name suggests, this is fashion in detail, so it has some absolutely wonderful close-up photography of the finer details on the gowns, and sometimes there's not necessarily the full-length photo of the gown to accompany it. The focus is very much on the details, the trimmings, the finishings, that kind of thing, how the fabric was pleated and the panels put together, that kind of thing. But one thing I do like about this book is it has these fabulous line drawings. And if, like me, you received kind of training in the fashion industry, which I did at university, when you're designing a garment and then you go to the production stage, kind of before you get there and you're planning the pattern and the preparation of the actual making of the garment, you produce very basic line drawings, which essentially it takes out all of the texture of the fabric, the detail of the fabric, obviously takes the colour out as well, so it's just a very simple black and white drawing, and the idea is that it just highlights the construction details, so exactly where the waist seam is, where the darts are, where the trimming sits, where the fastenings are, that kind of thing. And the idea is that it just breaks the gown down into a much simpler format, which then can be translated into the pattern and understanding how a garment is actually constructed. And I do think that's an incredibly useful technique to have and to understand if you are doing costuming, whether it's historical costuming or cosplaying, where you're looking at extant garments and figuring out, how do I make them, or how or why did they do this certain thing, or why does something look like that? So I think that's a very relevant, important skill to have. In another similar thread, I'm going to recommend the Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion books. Now, I don't think you will find these available on Amazon. Yeah, so you have to order these now directly from the School of Historical Dress in London. And for many years, these books were actually out of print, so they became very expensive to get hold of these. But now they have all been reprinted and reproduced with updated photographs and images in them, and I think there's newer versions out as well. So this is one of the kind of older copies. Again, it's one of the first costuming books I ever bought for myself over 20 years ago. And if you haven't used these before, these are a fantastic resource that features these fabulous black and white line drawings of original garments in museums. And I think these were done way back in the 60s, 70s, that kind of era. But as well as the fabulous, line drawn illustrations, the patterns worked out for you, and from these they're on scaled patterns, so you can scale them up to be full size, and then you can adapt them to your body measurements or whatever measurements you are working to. I did actually use this book when I was creating my Sleepy Hollow Katrina Van Tassel gown, which was a loosely 1780s historical gown. So I actually used one of the patterns, and I think it was this particular pattern. And actually one of my first ever costuming projects that I did as a teenager was, again, recreating one of these gowns. I don't have any photos, and it was an appalling costume that I would be ashamed to show you now. But we all have to start somewhere, and I'd always be proud of the fact that I actually used this book. But yes, so there won't be an affiliate link to this down below, but if you want to go support the School of Historical Dress and purchase some of these, they cover various different eras. This one is from 1660 through to 1860. Another two books which are good for figuring out patterns. These are very much more specific to different eras. So we have this one, which is the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking, and again I referenced this quite a lot when I was creating my Katrina Van Tassel gown. 18th century is not an era that I focus on very much, so it is really useful to have books which show you which take you through different techniques for that era, and this book in particular is one of those. And then this is the Victorian Dressmaker Volume 2 by Isabella Picture of Prior Attire. And this is very much in the same vein as the Patterns of Fashion book. It has scaled pattern drafts in it, which you can obviously then size up and recreate. But I believe everything that's in here are gowns that Isabella has made herself from her own designs, which of course are based on extant originals, but the patterns themselves aren't necessarily taken from extant originals. These are her modern replicas, which she has patterned. Next, I have 3 more books that I use regularly in my Victorian and Edwardian dressmaking endeavours. And these books all feature fashion illustrations or copies of fashion plates from the eras. And again, these are great for just picking out those little design details. Sometimes you get the basic shape and the silhouette, but it can be, the little details on the garments that can, make or break them. And it's just really lovely to see kind of different ways that gowns were trimmed, details, different buttons, different fastenings, all that kind of thing. You know, this is what was inspiring dressmakers at the time. You know, it's great as a modern historical costumier to be able to look at, you know, costumes and gowns that are in museums, but sometimes just getting that kind of more day-to-day experience of how a dressmaker at the time was inspired to create what she did, you know, and that would be from fashion illustrations in magazines, and you also start to see in the early 20th century fashion catalogues. So the ones in this book are particularly the Everyday Fashions 1909 to 1920, pictured in Sears catalogues. And Sears was a huge catalogue company in America, who were almost kind of like the Amazon of their day. They didn't do just fashion and clothing, they did everything you could possibly think of. They were kind of the leaders in mail order catalogues at the time, and, you know, really speared that that consumerism that established itself in the early 20th century, and obviously continues, you know, to this day. Yeah, so this one features actual facsimile copies of pages in the catalogue. So again, it's just that fascinating insight into, you know, how a woman would choose her clothing and dress herself at the time. You know, so she's looking at not just the coats that were fashionable, but, you know, what hats were in fashion that season. You know, what would she pick from this catalogue to match with, you know, her current wardrobe, or if she's, you know, ordering a completely new outfit. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I love those two. And then this book is similar again, but it has kind of more clip art kind of images, I like to call them. So the illustrations have been lifted out of their original context. If we compare it to this book, briefly, it kind of has the uncolorized, but it has the original fashion plates, you know, as they were drawn. Obviously, you know, beautiful settings and backgrounds to them. But this one very much has the garments lifted out, I say, of those images and of the magazines and things that they were placed in. But it just makes it really clear and easy to see the details on the individual garments. So again, I find this a really useful book just to dip into when I'm, you know, looking for that perfect finishing touch on a specific outfit, and obviously to help kind of inspire clients as well. Finally, I want to give an honourable mention to this book, which is The Crinoline, Fashion's Most Magnificent Disaster. And the reason I'm giving an honourable mention is because it's a little bit of a novelty book, and you'll see why in a minute. The clue is in, I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but the little 3D picture that's on the front there. But having said that, despite it being a little bit of a novelty book, it actually has real good, that's good English. It actually has really good historical value in it as well, but of course it is very, very specific to the crinoline. So if you're not interested in that era of costume history, it's possibly not going to be one for you. But at the same time, I do think it's a wonderful addition to any collection if you have an interest in costuming history or just, you know, 19th century history. And this is why. Oh no, I can't get it out. First of all, can I just say, it's co-written by Brian May from Queen. Who knew? But also, not only do you have this rather stunning book, it comes with a stereoscope. And it is amazing. See if I can remember how to put it together. How cool is that? And then when you finally get round to opening the book, let's find a decent page for you to look at. Aside from going through the fabulous history of the crinoline, it has prints of stereoscope cards, so you can use the stereoscope to view them. And obviously a stereoscope card is it basically creates a kind of a three-dimensional image. Fascinating inventions of the 19th century, and obviously it's kind of the very early forerunner to the entertainment industry, the cinema industry. You know, before we get to, you know, this is the next step up from photographs, you know, a flat photograph. This is almost, not quite, you know, the next step towards moving images, is to have these kind of three-dimensional images, and I just think that's absolutely amazing and fascinating. And again, it's that whole understanding how people at the time experienced the fashion industry, and costumes and clothing. You know, obviously the crinoline, rightly or wrongly, it was mocked a lot, and you know, people were fascinated by it and why women wore it, what women wore underneath, and all the rest of it. And obviously, you know, comedy and satire makes great entertainment, so you get these wonderful stereoscope images of, you know, women wearing crinolines. I think that is just absolutely ingenious, and you know, it's probably not going to be a book that you're going to, you know, dive into you know, every day in your sewing workroom, but what a wonderful kind of book to actually just own. And you know, you can break it out at dinner parties and things like that, and people are amazed by it. So yeah, so for that reason I give it an honourable mention, and again the link will be in the description down below. So yeah, so Brian May actually owns the London Stereoscopic Company publishing house, which specialises in publishing these books, and this one is the 7th book that has been published. I don't know how many there are, and what the other subjects are, but I'm sure they are no less interesting or fascinating. But obviously with this one being the crinoline, it obviously picked my attention. So I do hope you found this video interesting as well as entertaining. I do of course have dozens of other books, some are much more, you know, specific on what they cover, as well as books that cover films and TV series. You may have seen on the bookshelf kind of little overview, things like Downton Abbey books, the making of Pride and Prejudice, all that kind of thing. So I can't possibly go through all of them in this one video because it will be about 10 hours long. This is already running at 52 minutes. This was supposed to be a quick and easy video. But if there's any that you specifically want to know more about, do drop me a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have. As I say, this video does have affiliate links associated with it, so if you want to go and purchase any of these books on Amazon, I will receive a little bit of commission if you use the links down below. But equally, if you want to go and support an independent bookstore and you can get these books elsewhere, then by all means, please do. If you've liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up by clicking the little thumbs up icon down below. Leave me a comment, as that really helps my channel out. And if you want to subscribe, you can be notified when my next video goes out. You will sometimes find me in my sewing room where I'm creating costumes and clothing, usually with a historical or a fantasy kind of bent to them. And sometimes I am out and about at museums or places of historical interest, especially if it has a costuming or costume drama link to them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Oh, I've just realised I'm filming all of this and I don't actually have my microphone on. Oh my god! What an idiot! Microphone! You know, that thing that you paid a lot of money extra to have with this. And that's how old this book is, because there's pages that are falling apart. You see that kind of the school of historical dress. I knew what I meant. It's hard when you have so much information in your head. I can't remember names of things.